Have you ever wondered what happened to the dreaded Gestapo after Nazi Germany fell? These were the men in black leather coats, the ones who whispered fear into every corner of occupied Europe, the secret police who arrested without trial, tortured without conscience, and sent millions to their deaths. When the Third Reich collapsed in 1945, many of its leaders were captured, tried, or executed. But the Gestapo? That's where the story takes a darker and far more complicated turn. Because while history tells us justice was served at Nuremberg, the reality of the Gestapo's fate is far murkier, and today we're going to uncover it. But before we dive in, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss any of our deep dives into the hidden corners of history. Let's rewind to 1945. Nazi Germany has fallen. Hitler is dead. Berlin is rubble. The Allies are rounding up high-ranking Nazis, and the world waits for justice. The Gestapo, or Geheime Staatspolizei, the secret state police, was declared a criminal organization at the Nuremberg Trials. That meant, in theory, that every man who wore the badge, every officer who swore loyalty to Himmler, was guilty by association. But here's where things get complicated. The Allies quickly realized that punishing tens of thousands of Gestapo members would be practically impossible. And more than that, many of these same men had skills the Allies suddenly found very useful. At Nuremberg, the Gestapo was charged with crimes against humanity, mass executions, deportations, the hunting down of resistance fighters, Jews, Roma, and anyone who dared speak out against the Nazi regime. The tribunal ruled that the very existence of the Gestapo was criminal. In theory, every Gestapo member should have faced trial. In reality, only a small number did. The top leaders, Heinrich Müller, the head of the Gestapo, simply vanished. Last seen in Hitler's bunker in May 1945, his fate remains one of the greatest mysteries of the war. Some believe he died in Berlin. Others insist he was captured by the Soviets, who covered up his survival. And still others whisper that the Americans took him, using him as an intelligence asset. The fact that no body was ever found only fuels speculation. Other Gestapo leaders were brought to justice. Ernst Kaltenbrunner, who rose to head the RSHA, the sprawling security apparatus that included the Gestapo, was captured, tried, and hanged in 1946. Heinrich Himmler, the SS leader who oversaw the Gestapo, committed suicide with a cyanide capsule before he could face trial. But these were the big names. What about the thousands of men beneath them? Many claimed they were just following orders. Many destroyed their documents, changed identities, or simply slipped into the sea of millions of displaced people in post-war Europe. Some even went back to ordinary jobs as if nothing had happened. Here's where things get messy. The Cold War began almost immediately after the war ended. The Allies who had fought side by side, America, Britain, and the Soviet Union, were now rivals. And suddenly, men who had been yesterday's enemies became today's assets. The Gestapo had spent years fighting communists, infiltrating underground networks, and gathering intelligence on the Soviet Union. To the Americans, this meant one thing: these men were useful. Klaus Barbie is the most infamous example, nicknamed the Butcher of Lyon for his brutal torture of French resistance fighters. Barbie should have faced the gallows. Instead, the US Army Counterintelligence Corps recruited him. For years, he worked against communist cells in occupied Germany. When his presence became too controversial, the Americans smuggled him to South America, where he lived under a false identity. He trained military regimes in torture and interrogation until he was finally tracked down in the 1980s and extradited to France. There, decades late, he was sentenced to life in prison, and Barbie wasn't alone. Alois Brunner, one of Adolf Eichmann's closest aides and a man directly responsible for the deportation of over 100,000 Jews, fled to Syria. For decades, he lived openly in Damascus, working as an advisor to the Syrian regime on intelligence and security. Brunner never faced trial. According to reports, he lived into the 1990s or even early 2000s, old and unrepentant, protected by the very state he served. Other Gestapo veterans simply blended into the new Germany. In West Germany, denazification gave way to pragmatism. The new government needed police officers, judges, and bureaucrats, and who had experience running those institutions. Ironically, the same men who had served the Gestapo. By the 1950s, it wasn't uncommon to find ex-Gestapo men working quietly as police detectives or even judges in West Germany. One shocking example was Paul Dickhoff, a former Gestapo trainee who later became the head of Interpol in the 1960s. That's right, the international police organization meant to promote justice ended up being led by a man with Nazi ties. Meanwhile, in East Germany, the Soviets took a different approach. They punished some Gestapo members harshly, sending them to gulags or executing them. But others were recruited into the Stasi, the East German secret police. The Stasi became infamous for its surveillance and repression, and its methods bore a chilling resemblance to the Gestapo's. In a cruel irony, former Gestapo men helped build one of the most feared intelligence agencies of the Cold War. Even beyond Europe, the Gestapo's fingerprints lingered. In Latin America, fugitive Nazis trained military dictatorships in interrogation, torture, and counterinsurgency. In the Middle East, regimes like Syria and Egypt offered sanctuary to men like Alois Brunner, valuing their expertise in security over the horrors of their past. In some ways, the Gestapo didn't die. It was reborn in new uniforms and new languages, continuing its legacy of fear. Back in Germany, the reckoning came slowly. In the 1960s, inspired by the capture of Adolf Eichmann in Argentina, West Germany began new trials of Nazi war criminals. Some ex-Gestapo men were exposed and punished, but by then, many were old or had already lived decades in peace. Justice, when it came, felt delayed and incomplete. For every man like Barbie who was finally caught, there were dozens who lived quiet lives, their neighbors never knowing the full truth. So, what really happened to the Gestapo after World War II? Some leaders were hanged, some vanished without a trace, many escaped justice, and countless others slipped seamlessly into the post-war world. The victors declared them criminals, but the realities of politics, the Cold War, and human forgetfulness meant that the story was far from neat. The Gestapo as an organization was dismantled, but its people, its methods, and its influence lived on. In Germany, in the Soviet bloc, in Latin America, and beyond. And maybe that's the most chilling lesson of all. Evil organizations don't just disappear when the war ends. Their people scatter, their knowledge spreads, and their methods survive. History is messy, justice is incomplete, and the shadows of the past often linger far longer than we like to believe. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think enough justice was ever served for the crimes of the Gestapo? Or did the world turn a blind eye for the sake of politics and convenience? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into history, don't forget to like this video, share it with others, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration of the past.